Present and accounted for, and also on the phone. But we are recording, so we're good.
All right. All right, here we go. Thanks so much for showing up today, everybody. It's a busy Thursday. March Madness is opening up, and if you don't know, you should know. A lot of good games going on right now. So if we do have uh, fellow Berkeys not here because they're watching the games, I suppose we will give them a pass. Hey, today we're going to talk about, we're going to focus on the REPC, we're going to focus on earnest money, and we are going to talk about all the scenarios involving earnest money, what it means, how to use it, and strategies to deal with it. So it's mostly an earnest money huddle today. So we're going to jump right into it. Now I'm going to start out reading. I don't know if any of you ever really read the real estate division newsletter, and this is the newsletter sent to you by the real estate division of Utah, and it comes out quarterly. Um, one of the kind of interesting pieces of it is Kagi's Corner, where he talks about, I think Kagi does a lot of investigations and stuff for the state. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's maybe our lead investigator or something along those lines. Anyway, he writes his own piece, Kagi's Corner. And this one came up a while back, and I think we're going to use this huddle as a really good refresher on earnest money. So he wrote this. I think this is the best description of earnest money and how important it is. So we're going to go ahead and read this, just a few paragraphs as a reminder, as a refresher. All right, again, Kagi's Corner. Who has the greater responsibility in making sure that earnest money is deposited in accordance with the real estate purchase contract? The buyer's agent or the seller's agent? The answer to this question is both. Real estate licensees representing a client on a transaction have a fiduciary duty to their client to make sure that the buyer's earnest money has been delivered according to the terms of the REPC and receipted, regardless of who you represent. If you represent the buyer, you are tasked with ensuring the earnest money is timely deposited according to the contract and then communicating that information to the seller and or seller's agent. If you're the listing agent and you have not received confirmation of earnest money deposit, you should be following up with the buyer's agent for documentation of the successful deposit of earnest money. So let's talk a little bit about that first paragraph. So they are clearly stating that it is Utah law that real estate agents, regardless of the side of the transaction you're on, are responsible for the deposit of earnest money. Buyer's agents have the responsibility to communicate the deposit or non-deposit to the seller's agent. So if they don't deposit it in a timely fashion, it is your job to communicate that immediately. And when they do deposit it, it is also your job to communicate that as soon as possible. So be aware of that. And seller's agents, you do not get let off the hook on this. If you are working a deal and you know that the earnest money deadline was yesterday, you better be following up the very next day to ensure the deposit of earnest money. So that is your responsibility. So be aware of that. Okay. All right, moving on. Typically, there are two options with regards to earnest money. The buyer can deliver the earnest money to the buyer or seller's brokerage within 4 days, as indicated in the REPC, or use the deposit of earnest money with title insurance company addendum to the REPC and deposit the funds with the title company. The deposit of the earnest money with title company addendum is a state-approved form, which means anytime a licensee's client is depositing earnest money with the title company, this addendum must be included with the REPC. So don't forget that. That is no small thing. I know that there was a transitionary period, I think, when we were having a few people not include this addendum. It's not just some casual thing where a buyer gets to deposit their earnest money with the title company and not ask and not put that in writing and agreed upon with the seller. That is something that the seller has to agree to. So be aware of that. Regardless of the option selected, the buyer's agent must determine how to document receipt of the earnest money. If the earnest money is held with a brokerage, filling out the first section of the REPC is not confirmation of receipt and does not indicate where the funds are being held. The details can be outlined in an addendum, or if your association, which we do, offers a confirmation of earnest money receipt form, the division encourages the use of that form or similar substitute document to better protect your client and yourself. So I think a lot of our offices are handling the earnest money receipt form for us, so that's a good thing. But if they are not, and you are kind of going on the fly there, make sure you're using that form to help document the receipt. Moving on, using the state-approved form or an addendum in the proper way to document receipt of earnest money held with the title company, and is a clear way to communicate to all parties that earnest monies have been received and where they are being held. As mentioned earlier, both the buyer's agent and the seller's agent have a duty to their clients to make sure that earnest money has been received. If the buyer's agent has not provided confirmation that the earnest money has been delivered, the seller's agent also has a fiduciary duty to their client to follow up with the buyer's agent and ensure compliance with the REPC. In the unfortunate and unusual situation where a buyer's earnest money check has been deposited and returned for deficient funds, the buyer's agent should promptly notify their client and the seller's agent that the earnest money check has been returned and then determine whether an addendum should be prepared to address this issue and attempt to resolve the failure to provide earnest money funds as originally contracted. It is essential that the seller's agent be promptly notified of the earnest money deposit breach. So that's a really good description of the importance of earnest money. And I think it's really important to note that if you're involved in a transaction as a seller's agent, and it's not uncommon, though it should be uncommon, where we sort of forget to follow up with them that earnest money has been deposited, in a timely fashion, and we discover that it's not. The buyer's agent has culpability in this, and conversely, if you are the buyer's agent, you don't have choices about whether or not you notify the other party when they don't deposit their earnest money check on time. You don't have a choice. So make sure you communicate that with your clients that you have to comply with state law. Here's another thing I wanted to discuss today. So and a lot of this stuff is refresher stuff, but I feel like it's always good to do it occasionally.
Hey, Mike, just a point to raise here on the earnest money and why we have to have the title company addendum that's going to the title company.
Mm-hmm.
The title company trust accounts have different rules from the real estate trust account. And the buyer and seller need to know that if they allow that to be deposited at a title company, that the release of that requires two signatures, one from the buyer and from the seller before the title company will release. And if one of the parties won't sign, then it has to be interpled, and it could take months to get the money back to the buyer. They need to be well aware of that. And I think it's explained right in that title company form that this puts you at risk of getting their earnest money returned because we're following the trust account rules for title companies rather than the trust account rules for the real estate division, which basically say that without further written authorization from the other side, the buyer can get their earnest money back should they cancel before one of the contingencies. And that's a huge deal. If their money gets stuck there, then the agent could be held liable for that.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. That is a big deal. And I would encourage all of you that to just firmly reject those situations.
The other thing to note too is that in the case that you're dealing with a small company that claims they don't have a trust account, so they can't put it in their own company trust account, we can actually have the earnest money deposited in the Berkshire Hathaway trust account so that we can still have the release governed by the real estate trust rules. There is a form which then allows both parties to agree to have it held in the Berkshire trust account rather than in a title company trust account.
Yeah.
It's in our forms there.
By the way, how many people on this call have done that, or have actually, as a listing agent, had another party's earnest money deposited into our trust account? Rachel says multiple times.
Yeah.
That's good. Natalie says yes. Scott says, aren't all brokerages required to have an account? I believe they are.
They are required by law to have one. However, some of them are too cheap to hire anybody to manage it. So they push it off on the title company, let the title company subsidize their brokerage.
And I want to also affirm Kevin's use of the word cheap. And make sure that we emphasize that that's exactly the reason why they are not depositing their earnest money into their trust account, and not for other reasons which they try to claim online. So yeah, it looks like that's happening frequently. So it is handy, and in fact, this it didn't come to fruition, but we had a situation last week where a seller showed up, or excuse me, we represented the seller in this situation, and the buyer signed the documents on the appropriate day, but did not deposit funds in their fashion, and we got word that they were getting a little bit of cold feet, and part of the strategy there is that you, just so you guys are aware, when a broker hears this, that there's some cold feet, one of the first things I think of is, hey, don't, we're probably going to contest that earnest money, so don't do anything with it. And Kevin, you're much better at this than me. I do believe it's state law that once we contest earnest money, they're required to hold it in their trust account. Is that correct?
Yeah, if we get a written notice from the other side, we're supposed to hold it. The law says that if the broker cannot determine who the earnest money should go to, but if we can readily determine who it is, we can go ahead and release it prior to getting something from an attorney or some written notice that claims that should go to the other party. In which case we have to hold it, but we generally get it released before it actually goes down the road anywhere, because it says without further written authorization from the other party. So they can try to stop it temporarily, but if they have truly canceled within their deadlines, then we can go ahead and release regardless.
Yeah. And that is a big, I mean, that part is what makes this important, that we as a company can determine if our clients deserve that earnest money and release it back to them. We can make that decision ourselves. So big deal. Scott says wholesalers often want earnest money at title. Big red flag. Yeah. I mean, it can be, depositing your earnest money at title, it can go smooth. When everything goes smooth, you almost don't need rules, but that just doesn't happen that often. That's why we have rules. So don't bend on that one. I think it's a good one to not bend on. So the other thing that we do talk about on the timing. Oh, no. Let's back up a bit. So I want to talk about, and we talked about at this sales meeting here 2 weeks ago about the appropriate funds. Now, I think we as a company have basically decided we do not want personal checks. That's problematic, especially at the amounts the average amounts that we're dealing with. Personal checks can be a problem. So cashier's checks, wires are the way to do that. And by the way, let's talk about timing. We're going to talk about timing and why it's important, and how, as it relates to earnest money, by the way, obviously. So let's read time is of the essence. I don't know that we, oh, my screen's a little weird. Are you guys seeing the purchase contract?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay.
And it's on
So,
time is of the essence.
yeah, there we go. Let me blow that up a little bit. There we go. Oh, too much. All right, so paragraph 21. And by the way, this is for all deadlines for the REPC. So paragraph 21. Time is of the essence. Time is of the essence regarding the dates set forth in the REPC. Extensions must be agreed to in writing by all parties unless otherwise explicitly stated in the REPC. A. Performance under section of the REPC which references a date shall absolutely be required by 5 p.m. Mountain Time on the stated date. And B. The term days and calendar days shall mean calendar days and shall be counted beginning on the day following the event which triggers the timing requirement. Performance dates and times referenced herein shall not be binding upon the title companies, lenders, appraisers, and other parties not in the REPC, except otherwise agreed to in writing by such non-party. All right, so let's talk about that. So, and let's talk about it in reference to earnest money. So, as if you have a client who is struggling to, send a wire or cashier's check, or they just can't get it to the company, you as an agent can take possession of that cashier's check yourself, and that completes the first requirement. Okay, so you need to get that in the deadline, and then, but of course, the brokerage has a deadline once you take possession. So we need that check as soon as possible too, because we have, I think it's 4 additional days to deposit that. And so we do have deadlines ourselves. So you can take possession immediately of a check. All else fails, that's all we can do. That's what you do. But you need to take possession of it and sign for confirmation of receipt, and then get that to us immediately. And your possession alone takes care of that requirement. And also, when let's review the counting of the days. So if you sign that contract on a Monday, those calculated dates start on Tuesday. You start counting one on that next Tuesday. So, FYI. Scott, what are we?
That was in regard to the number of days that the brokerage has to deposit the check. I thought it was 3. You just said 4. I'm just curious.
I've had 4 in my head for a long time. I don't know that we've ever had.
Right at the top, it's right at the top of the REPC, if you want to just flip to that.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Thank you, Kevin. Let's go to that, back to that REPC.
Paragraph 1.
All right, there it is. After acceptance of the REPC by buyer and seller, and the receipt of the earnest money by the brokerage shall have 4 calendar days in which to deposit the earnest money into the brokerage real estate trust account. So, so there you have it. It's written in the REPC. So how that works is, if you're going to do some math there, let's say, we sign the contract on Monday. So theoretically, you have until Friday to take receipt, and then we would have the brokerage. So if you take receipt on Friday, now the brokerage has Monday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday is their deadline to deposit that. So that's how that would work.
Rachel, you were saying that it's 3 days.
State law. So the residential real estate purchase contract changes it and changes the terms for both buyer and seller to be 4 days. But when
Okay,
you do a commercial contract, it says per state law.
and which is 3. Okay. Just the REPC. I think the REPC allows for a holiday weekend. That's probably why they did that, for a long weekend.
Hmm.
That's why I've always understood it was
Yeah,
4
that's why
days.
they updated to 4 days, was because, if a Memorial Day weekend or something to that regard, you're not gonna be able to get it there in time. But yeah, state law is 3 days. Commercial REPC says per state law, but the residential REPC says 4 days.
Great. Good to know. Hey, another reason that we would prefer wires is oftentimes when a buyer changes their mind, decides to cancel based off of due diligence, or just cold feet right off the bat. If it's within days of them writing the offer, we can actually wire it back to them right away. If it's a cashier's check, I believe it's at least a 7-day hold period before we can wire the money back, and it's 10 days on a personal check. And we often have buyers saying, well, I want that money back in my account. I have the bills to pay, but we can't send money back to them until the Federal Reserve holding period is passed. It's just an accounting principle. We don't do it for fear that we're sending good money for bad money received.
Yeah, it's actually more common than you would think. So that's why but that's one of the biggest reasons why we avoid personal checks, is it can be a big hassle. Okay, moving on. We're going to talk about let's just talk about earnest money amounts itself and how it relates to seller cancellations and defaults and buyers cancellations. Let's read, what I want to do is read paragraph 16. Let's read paragraph 16 as it relates to earnest money amounts. And as always, if you would like to contribute, I really hope that you do. All right, we're going to read both buyer and seller default here so we can get some perspective on these defaults, and read it in this time, read it with the perspective of earnest money, okay? Paragraph 16, default, buyer default. If buyer defaults, seller may elect one of the following remedies. A, cancel the REPC and retain their earnest money deposit or deposits, if applicable, as liquidated damages. B, maintain the earnest money deposits or deposits, if applicable, in trust and sue buyer to specifically enforce the REPC. Or C, return the earnest money deposit or deposits, if applicable, to buyer and pursue any other remedies available at law. So, I think we mentioned this a lot, but it's worth repeating. If this is something you would tell your client, if you want to sue the other party for anything other than specific performance, you got to give them their earnest money back, and that might change their perspective quickly. And then that was buyer deposit, buyer default. Section 16.2, seller default. If seller defaults, buyer may elect one of the following remedies. Cancel the REPC. In addition to the return of the earnest money deposit or deposits, if applicable, buyer may elect to accept from seller as liquidated damages a sum equal to the earnest money deposit or deposits if applicable, or B, maintain the earnest money deposits or deposits if applicable in trust and sue seller to specifically enforce the REPC, or C, accept a return of the earnest money deposit or deposits if applicable and pursue any other remedies available at law. If buyer elects to accept liquidated damages, seller agrees to pay the liquidated damages to buyer upon demand. So if you think about oh, sorry, I missed a comment from Scott. Scott said, I had a client whose personal check bounced in regards to earnest money. Yeah, that's a big problem. That's a big problem. And and of course, the second that happens, we need to inform the other party. There you have it. Let's talk about real damages. So if you're a buyer, we all know that a buyer takes on additional costs to purchase a home, right? They're paying for a home inspection. They're paying for home inspections, appraisals, and they're actually coming out of their own pocket to purchase this property. And so when we take that into account, at a minimum, does the earnest money amount that they're depositing cover that? So if they're coming out of pocket, say $2,000, we'll use that as a round number, and your earnest money deposit is $2,000, does that really feel like the right amount of earnest money to deposit in order to cover their losses? I think technically maybe, but I don't know that anybody will feel like they've been made whole in that situation. So let's make sure that that's part of the conversation about when we're writing offers, when people ask, hey, how much earnest money should I deposit? That's the conversation. Start there. I think that's good advice, is just to start with, well, if this fails, part of your damages, really the quickest way to resolve the conflict is for them to pay you an amount equal to the earnest money deposit. That's the most likely way for you to recover your damages in this situation. So think about that. And of course, the purchase price amount is another factor in determining how much earnest money someone should be depositing. I'll go ahead and ask Rachel. Rachel, what's your rule of thumb here?
Well, in Moab, we're kind of a different market, but a lot of us strive for like around 1%. I think there are other markets that go a lot higher than that. But I also I like rounded numbers like 5,000, 7,500, 10,000, 15, 20,000. I don't really like it when people are like 3,800 or yeah, I don't know. It just makes, I think, accounting a little bit harder. So I try to be sensitive to that because I used to have to do my own trust account. But if somebody has $1 million product, I always encourage them to be like 15 to 20,000 in earnest money at least. You get up to like 2.5 million, you're thinking at least 50,000 up to 100,000. So I don't know how your markets are, but our littler products that are like 500,000, we're usually like 5,000.
Yeah.
You know where the 1% came from, kind of the traditional 1%? What do you think the average mortgage payment is on say $100,000 or $200,000 home? It's about 1%. So when the buyer defaults and can't perform and they're going to take the earnest money, you can call the seller and say, hey, got good news and bad news. Bad news is the buyer's not going to close. The good news is the earnest money is going to cover next month's payment, so we can get it back on the market. That's where the 1% came from, and for many years that was kind of the rule of thumb. However, it's a little higher now, so you may have to go a little more than 1% to make sure that seller's whole. In fact, most sellers will want at least their next month's payment as earnest money. That's kind of a rule of thumb. But again, it's earnest money, and if you really want a strong offer, I'd go a lot higher than that if your buyer's able to. I had a personal rule of thumb because I did a lot of estate sale purchases in the Sugar House area and the avenues when I first got started. And when I saw on the title, when I knew that it was an estate sale and there was 4 or 5 family members that had to sign off on the REPC, I knew that one of them was going to decide to try to buy the house themselves, and I would encourage my buyer to put a large earnest money in there so that the family, if they decided to try to can't or tried to default and sell it to one of the family members instead of my buyer, it was going to hurt because then they're going to have to give us a lot more earnest money back. And it saved a lot of sales.
Scott says, I agree with Kevin, high earnest money. Yeah, I think that's a really good example of market specific earnest money amounts. And just to let you know, Rachel, I think every amount you said there, I think kind of vibes with what we're doing up here in Weber County anyway, and a lot of the stuff I've done in Salt Lake County. And yeah, in certain instances, you would default to a higher amount of earnest money to discourage some type of behavior. And many of us on this call will remember the insane days of 2020, 2021. And we were encouraging everyone to put an enormously high amount of earnest money because the sellers were getting inundated with offers. And so they were like, oh, I'm getting 30,000 more and the earnest money's only 10,000. Well, that's a win for me. I'm going to cancel, give you a $10,000 check and take a higher offer. So there's a lot of scenarios in which the earnest money amount is used to discourage negative behavior and encourage our buyer to secure something. And Ron says, think of it as a tool. What do you want to accomplish with it? Yeah, I think that's a really good strategy. And, I think in some price ranges, we're scraping together the most amount that we can, the most money that we can even come up with to hit a bare minimum of earnest money deposit.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah, take it away.
Well, we just had Lance's earnest money class down here yesterday, so
Okay.
maybe everybody needs a refresher on that. But I was never taught to say a percentage. It always depended on the situation.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
It's always negotiable between buyer and seller, but there are some cases you need to go higher to make sure that your client's interests are protected. And, if they can't go higher, you go with what they can offer.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and there's all sorts of interesting scenarios. I remember this was probably 3 or 4 years ago. I was representing a buyer on an apartment complex, and I think the purchase price was around $4 million. And the seller that I was working with was kind of squirrely, saying, yeah, I'm going to sell. No, I'm not going to sell. Yeah, I'm going to sell. And my advice was, that my buyer had an amount in mind of earnest money you want to deposit. And I said, do you feel comfortable that this guy's just not going to back out? And he said, no. And I said, well, the only tool we have to discourage him is your earnest money amount. So you should deposit an amount that you believe will scare him into closing. And that was the strategy. And so, yeah, it's Ron, you're absolutely correct. It's a tool to get the things we need. And I think that's probably the best way to think about it. And I think thinking about it also in terms of like, well, let's start at 1% and then throw in all the factors to see where we end up with if they're really confused, right? Or you're wondering where you should be with earnest money deposit amounts.
Why Lance's class is called the Power of Earnest Money, right?
Power of earnest money. I've been hearing about Lance's earnest money class for 5 years now, and I've never had it. And everybody,
it's a good class. You should.
Everybody's always bragging
listen
about it.
One time.
I went to Lance's earnest money class.
Mike,
I want to go. I want to go to be clear. What's up, Scott?
I think it's one of the rules that's broken most often as well. and it just gives you that added leverage. I had a client out in Tooele, and no offense to Tooele agents, but I said to my client, let's put down a ton of earnest money because these agents seem to be subpar. And sure enough, she put down 10%. We were under contract. And the listing agent, who was actually the daughter of the seller, was 3 days late with earnest money. I'm like, I told you this was going to happen. What do you want to do? We ended up closing, but I mean, it's leverage. It's simply leverage. And the number of people who fail to deliver that on time is mind blowing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there are scenarios too where, you know, if you're a listing agent and you have concerns about a buyer's ability to close or any of those things, sometimes just requesting more earnest money is also a form of vetting. You know, if it's in a higher price range and they can't come up with the money, do we really feel like they also have the ability to close on a transaction of that size? And that can boil its way all the way down to, you know, a $320,000 condo in Ogden. You know, do they really have the ability and the cash to close on this if they can't come up with, you know, $2,500 or $3,000 in cash? And no offense to anybody, all of us are reaching for things that sometimes are maybe be out of our reach and we're pushing ourselves, but it can be also a really good vetting tool.
You could also have additional earnest money deposited on their payday, the next payday,
Yeah.
to boost that earnest money up. If they offer, you know, and they appear to be qualified, but all the cash they can scrape together right now, well, can you deposit more next week? So we have a more, you know, respectable amount in there that'll make the deal work.
Yep.
So that's always a possibility. Think of that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Kevin, because you know, I don't know I can't even think of the last time I saw a purchase contract with additional earnest money deposits in it. It just doesn't seem to be a habit up here anyway of things that people are using to push a deal along. But that's also a really great form of vetting too. And maybe, you know, maybe if you're trying to just string a deal together and make it happen, that's a good strategy. Just, hey, if you don't have it now, maybe you'll have it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. You can deposit it
The
then.
other thing we see a lot is an additional amount by due diligence, after due diligence, you know, really putting their money where their mouth is at that point. So we make sure they're not going to back out. We see
Yeah.
it a lot up here.
Yeah, that's a really good strategy. I mean, in the commercial world, that was very common to see. After your due diligence is done, you're depositing a very large amount of earnest money, and that really cuts to the chase of the deal quickly. And you know, it does reduce the amount of him-hawing and squirreling around on transactions, and you know, if they're on the fence, that gets them off the fence real quick, one way or the other, so we can move on. So yeah, great strategy. All right, we are also going to this has come up a little. You know, this is always rearing its head, and I think there was somebody cruising around the Wasatch Front. Shifting gears slightly here, there was somebody cruising along the Wasatch Front, writing offers on property with really tight seller disclosure deadlines, and these offers were designed to bait the seller into defaulting on the deadline. And then and in this instance, in this very rare instance, this person was actually using it just as a money-making scheme, but there does seem to be a strategy among some people to use this as leverage for further negotiating items down the road when they miss these sellers' disclosure deadlines. And as we all know, you know, there are plenty of agents out there who are, you know, not doing their homework on their listings like they should, like getting, you know, the HOA minutes and the CC&Rs and title reports in a timely fashion. And so people can take advantage of that. So just remember, as a listing agent, put that seller's disclosure in a comfortable, you know, if you think you can do it in 5 days, make it 7 or 8, give yourself a buffer, give your seller a buffer, to make sure you're coming in under that deadline and not create any additional problems. Another issue that seems to be popping up. Oh, sorry, y'all. I'm trying to get something up here on the screen. Another issue that's coming up. So, and I haven't seen this a lot, but I've had conversations with people who are seeing it. So instead of in our deadlines, instead of actually writing the day that the deadline occurs, they are writing X number of days after acceptance, instead of using actual days. So this can create this in the commercial world, it's very common because negotiations can take weeks, right? You can be strung out for a very long time, and constantly updating a counter offer or what with new dates is not really a prudent thing to do. But I think what many times people fail to do is secure those dates after someone accepts. So if you do see this happening and you're ready to accept an offer, I would encourage you not to just simply accept the offer. I would encourage you to counter back with the dates as you see them, or maybe communicate this beforehand. Do you think these are the correct dates according to the number of days after acceptance that you originally put? Make sure you're clarifying that and getting it in the contract so the dates are clear. This can and often does cause confusion. But let's say you do end up accepting a contract that says number of days after acceptance, which these deadlines all occur. A really good practice in the commercial world is there's a lot of agents will use what they call a letter of understanding or some kind of situation thereof. Well, they'll send a one-page document that they believe summarizes the key points, mostly the dates of the contract, and they send it to the other party. So if there is some dispute about that, they can solve it immediately. So remember, that's something you can do, and you don't have to do that. You could just send a text message. Do you believe that, 10 days after acceptance happens to be April 12th or whatever, right? So do those things just to clear that up. And obviously as the broker, because we're always paranoid, if you're going to clean it up, you might as well clean it up in an addendum.
Yeah, Mike, those of us who've been in business long enough remember the old REPC that the state had out there. It used to stack dates. In section 24, there was so many days after acceptance, and then it was so many days after due diligence and so forth, and you had to sit and go down through and count. And there were so many disputes over it all that I think it was about 15 years ago, 15 or 20 years ago, they actually went to an actual date, and they came out very strongly saying, we want an absolute date in there, not so many days from acceptance, to avoid confusion and avoid disputes and transactions. Because it's really easy to understand that if it's April 5th at 5 p.m., nobody can, miscount days.
Yep. That is one thing that is actually really, and I agree with Kevin, the new clear deadlines that our industry has gravitated towards is actually really handy. And there's probably plenty of you who have done real estate deals in California. I have not. I have a cousin who just sells houses in Santa Barbara. And according to his description, there's not a closing date. There's a closing area, closing time frame. It could occur now. It could occur in another 10 days, but probably
Do they go by spring, April, summer,
yeah,
fall?
just sometime around this area, very casual about it. And when he talks about that, I just sort of just get, secondhand anxiety just thinking about the problems that cause. And, I asked him, do you hate that? And he goes, yeah, I hate it because I want to get paid. You never know when you're going to get paid. And, yeah, it's a slightly selfish position, but I'm sure all the.
Yeah, let's think about the poor clients. When do you schedule the moving van?
I know.
When do you cancel your lease on your other property you're in?
I know it is a bizarre thing to talk about, and in conjunction with that, the penalties, buyers have way more power than our REPC. So he said sometimes it can get really difficult, and but he says at the end of the day, it's probably like that everywhere. Motivated people close and get things done because they want to move forward too. So there's that. Okay. Oh, here's a reminder. This has come up here recently. And let's see, we're going to go to, let me move some stuff around. We are going to go to paragraph 8.3. We talk about this a lot. And we're going to talk about, let's see. The gist of this is, remember, unless there is an amount in 8.3 BI, due diligence really doesn't mean a whole lot if there is a financing and appraisal deadline. So let's read this again, 8.3 BI, buyer's right to cancel before the financing and appraisal deadline. If buyer, in buyer's sole discretion, is not satisfied with the terms and condition of the loan, buyer may, after the due diligence deadline referenced in section 24B, if applicable, cancel the REPC by providing written notice to the seller no later than the financing and appraisal deadline referenced in section 24C, whereupon blank dollars of the buyer's earnest money deposit shall be released to seller without the requirement of further written authorization from buyer, and the remainder of the buyer's earnest money shall be released to the buyer without further written authorization. And I think what we're getting at here is, and I think we all really realize this, but yes, we do have due diligence deadlines, and I think as an industry we take them pretty seriously. But the fact of the matter is, it's in buyer's sole discretion after they review the terms and conditions of their loan whether or not they want to accept them. Which means if their situation is exactly the same as the day they went under contract, as it is on their financing and appraisal deadline, and they just decide on a whim that they no longer like that, they are within their rights in the REPC to cancel, right? So there is really no guardrails. So the only real guardrail that we can put up in this instance is 8.3 BI. So another good tool of the REPC to really put some heat on people, right? So and to me, I think if we are listing agents or, whatever the side this would benefit, I would encourage everybody to use this a little bit more. It makes our due diligence deadline mean something, right? So whether or not they're happy with their loan is irrelevant to us. If your due diligence is up and it's over and you're serious about purchasing this property, X amount of dollars is now non-refundable. I think it's a pretty reasonable position to take in many instances. So be aware of that, use it, and I think there's a lot of situations where we forget that exists that could benefit our clients. So keep that in mind next time where you want to put some heat on somebody, make them be serious. All right, only a couple more things to talk about. We're going to talk about final pre-settlement walkthroughs. I keep sharing and unsharing. All right, let's read paragraph 11. Final pre-settlement walkthrough inspection. No earlier than 7 calendar days prior to settlement and upon a reasonable notice and at a reasonable time, buyer may conduct a final pre-settlement walkthrough inspection of the property to determine only that the property is as represented, meaning that the items referenced in section 1.1, 1.2, and 8.1 BII, the items, are respectively present, repaired, or corrected as agreed. The failure to conduct a walkthrough inspection or to claim that an item is not as represented shall not constitute a waiver by buyer of the right to receive on the date of possession the items as represented. I think this is really important. I think, let me know in the chat, I think everybody's really pressing hard on the pre-settlement walkthrough inspection. Everybody's doing it, correct? The vast majority of the time. Man, I hope that you are. Let's talk about a few scenarios. We only have a few minutes left, but let's talk about a few scenarios that I think come up and maybe we can discuss ways to handle them. Now, should repairs, let's say you negotiated some repairs to be done. Should the repairs be done by the final pre-settlement walkthrough? Should they be done?
Have to be done by settlement per the contract.
That's right. So think about that. So, and I've dealt with this many times. So let's say we're walking through on a Wednesday and that next Thursday is their settlement deadline and they have repairs to do. Let's say it's a big repair and they haven't had it done. What can we really say that carries weight here? I mean, I don't know that you can really say a lot. because they have a deadline to get these done, and we don't know what their strategy is. Maybe they like to, maybe they like to start work at 8 o'clock at night and pull an all-nighter and work for 12 hours straight in the silence, right? There's a whole lot of scenarios in which they can complete these tasks. Ron says, set a date to be finished before the walkthrough. Yeah, I think if you are talking about repairs and you believe them to be serious or require, a lot of these repairs, we can hire somebody to come and they're going to be done in a day or 2 days, and we don't have to worry about them that often. But some repairs may require more than that, and we need to remember that if people want some relief that these things are done, we need to have deadlines that are probably before settlement deadline, because we can't say anything until the settlement deadline and make claims that they aren't completing them, which can cause huge problems.
Or start negotiating some sort of an escrow to make sure that the repairs are done. If you're intent on going ahead and settling as on the date that's agreed to, and the sellers admit they're not going to have it done because they can't get the worker there, they're waiting for parts or something like that, at least have a heads up at the walkthrough that you're now going to have to put together some sort of an escrow agreement with the title company to hold back some of the seller's proceeds to provide for those if the lender will allow it.
Yeah, really great advice. I think, the pre-settlement walkthrough can be used as sort of a launching point for to deal with any problems that you see coming down the line. So, but never skip that walkthrough. I think, of all the times I've dealt with serious problems that relate to, say, they took something off the wall, or they didn't leave the blinds, or we negotiated the refrigerator to stay and they took it. And, I'll ask, well, was it there on your walkthrough? We didn't do a walkthrough. Well, maybe we could have solved this problem beforehand, right? Maybe we could have solved it before they got the keys to their house, which would have made their experience a lot better. And they may have still liked us, right? So remember those things as you're schedule those, talk about pre-settlement walkthrough. And all right, folks, we haven't done the naughty list in quite a while, and I only got one sort of joke naughty list thing, but I do have 2 good lessons to learn from the newsletter. So we're going to go ahead and read some naughty list stuff. And, names have been changed to protect the innocent. And here we go. In an order stipulated in February of a certain date, Mr. Doe admits that he obtained permission to show a client a home listed with another agent. During the showing, and without the knowledge or consent of the seller or seller's agent, he recorded himself walking through the home, commenting on features that he did not like. Mr. Doe posted the video on social media account without the consent of the homeowner or the listing agent, but later removed it. When asked about it by the division, Mr. Doe denied the existence of the video. In a subsequent interview with the division, he admitted that the existence of the video that he had posted on social media. He later then admits that the conduct violated Utah law and administrative rules, and he agreed to pay a civil penalty of $5,000. So this is a really good lesson of filming with or without permission. So I'm so glad you're here, Kevin, because you do help make these things a lot easier. Kevin, what do you think his fine was for? Lying or posting a video of the inside of a home to social media without the permission of the listing agent?
I think it's posting the video, and then to lie, it compounded it. Probably would have been less.
Yeah.
If he had come clean.
That's a really good point. I think if he had come clean, he's probably paying less than $2,000 or maybe a couple grand. But when you lie about it, it makes it worse.
Yeah.
Remember that. I think we're getting a lot better. But there has been, if you're really searching, I'm sure every day you could find a video of a real estate agent posting a video from the inside of a home without the permission of a listing agent or a seller. And not to mention, there's a great one on here, and I've read it in the past, and I saw it today, but I chose not to do it because we probably talked about it twice. There was a real estate agent. It wasn't his listing. He hired a film crew to come in so he could shoot a video in someone else's listing, and he got caught as he was changing his outfit for the second time to film his video. Pretty embarrassing for our business, but whatever, right? All right, moving on. In a stipulated order dated also in February, this man admits that he signed a listing agreement to represent the seller in a property transaction. The seller and buyer initially entered into a real estate purchase contract, but later entered into a lease agreement with an option to purchase the property. This agent also named as the seller's representative in the lease option. The REPC was not completed. Mr. Stevenson and the seller negotiated for one half of the amount that would have been paid as a sales commission from the REPC to be paid directly to the agent as compensation for the lease option. The supervising broker was not informed of the lease option, and this man admits that his conduct violates Utah law. He agreed to pay $3,000. He agreed to pay $3,000 because he did not run his transaction through the real estate brokerage, and the brokerage did not know it. So, by the way, don't do that. And this is the final funny one. And I mean, listen, if you're gonna commit crimes and fraud, you gotta do better than this. You just have to, or you're gonna get caught. This man admits that he placed an advertisement identifying a property for sale. This advertisement was misleading in that it implied a home was offered for sale by owner at a specific list price when he actually attempting to solicit customers for a financial restoration business that he operates. The property used in the advertisement is actually the address for United States Post Office. Advertising of property in a false and misleading or deceptive manner is a violation of Utah law, and how this man got away with a civil penalty of only $500 and 3 hours of continuing education is beyond me. I mean, I feel like this is several $1,000s and he just got away. I mean, $500?
It's a slap on the wrist.
That's a slap on the wrist. He should get double that just for being so dumb as to put the address of a post office. I mean, that's really insulting to the public, but maybe somebody fell for it.
Yeah.
All right,
We've actually seen signs put on properties of absentee owners too that live out of state by agents, and I've seen that in the newsletter too. So you cannot advertise a property without written authorization, but used to see a lot of them down in the valley there, and you go to trying to find them on the MLS, they're not there, and find out that the owner had no idea that his property was for sale. They were just using signs to generate leads.
It is bizarre, isn't it? Kimberly says, sound like my ex-husband's strategy. Ooh, that bites. That bites.
That's why he's the ex.
That's right. That's right. He's the ex. All right, y'all. It's 1:56. It's time to wrap it up. Thanks so much for coming and attending the huddle this week. We'll catch you later.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, y'all.